I feel the cold first, the kind that presses through my coat and crawls along the spine like a wet fingertip, the kind you don't notice until you realize it's been watching you longer than you've been watching it. The alley is too narrow, too silent, shadows stretching like they're waiting for me to breathe wrong, and I can hear my own pulse ricocheting in my ears, louder than the distant siren that dies somewhere behind the fog. My shoes scrape against the concrete and the sound feels foreign, like it belongs to someone following me rather than to me, and the moment I think that, the fog shifts. Not from the wind, there is no wind here, but like something exhaled in the darkness just ahead. I stop moving. The fog doesn't. It curls around my legs, rises, thickens, as if tasting the air around me, and I can swear the temperature drops again. Another unseen step closer, another breath that doesn't belong to me merging with mine. A faint metallic smell cuts through the damp, rust or blood or something older, and I feel the weight of it settle on my tongue. My flashlight flickers once, twice, then steadies not because it fixed itself but because whatever was interfering with it decided to let go. The beam stretches ahead, swallowed by grey, returning nothing except the faintest glint of something wet on the ground, a smear that disappears the moment I blink. I don't dare blink again. The buildings seem to lean inward now, the brickwork bending in the corners of my vision like they're trying to listen, trying to hear what I'll do next. My breath fogs the air, but only mine does. No other puffs, no silhouettes forming in the mist, just the feeling of a presence pressing against my chest as if refusing to let me step back. Every instinct tells me to run, but my legs feel threaded into the pavement. That's when I hear it, faint, brittle, a whisper scraping along the brick behind me, not forming words but shaping something close enough that my mind tries to translate it. A warning, a plea, a threat. I turn slowly, too slowly, because the air grows heavy around my shoulders like invisible hands trying to hold me in place. The darkness behind me isn't empty anymore. It is depth now, dimension, a sense of something standing just beyond the radius of my failing light, something tall enough that I can feel it looming even though I can't see it. My throat tightens. The whisper stops. The silence that follows feels aware. Then a sound, soft, deliberate, a footstep that doesn't echo. My hand tightens around the flashlight, knuckles cracking, the beam jittering as if reacting to something I can't register. The fog parts in one spot, like a figure walked through it without permission. I feel the air break against my face, just the faintest shift, but enough to know that whatever moved is close, too close, close enough that I can smell something faintly sweet and rotten beneath the rain-soaked dust. The step comes again, but it's not ahead of me this time. It's behind, or above, or inside the alley wall itself, the sound bending in a way my brain can't map. I spin and the world lags behind, like the darkness is reluctant to reveal what it's been hiding. My vision tunnels, the edges warping, and shapes I know aren't real pulse in and out of the fog, long limbs, a face without lines, eyes that shine when no light hits. My heartbeat stumbles. Another whisper grazes my ear, closer than skin, like it rose from beneath my jaw. Cold fingers, imagined or not, brush the back of my neck and every muscle locks. I inhale sharply and the air doesn't taste like air anymore. It tastes like something old, sealed away, something that's been waiting here far longer than I have. My flashlight dims. The fog pulses. The ground beneath me trembles like something massive shifted deep underneath it. Far away a car horn blares, but the sound reaches this alley warped, slowed, stretched thin like it had to push through something thick to get here. My vision flickers at the edges. I take a step forward and feel resistance, not physical, but a pressure like pushing through water, thickening the more I force myself to move. The air hums, faint at first, then rising as if a distant engine were winding up somewhere beneath the pavement. But it's not mechanical. It's too low, too resonant, vibrating in my chest rather than my ears. I swallow hard, feeling that vibration echo through my ribcage. My flashlight beam finally catches something, just a fragment, a curve, a surface too smooth to belong here, and in the second I try to focus on it, the fog slams inward, swallowing it whole like it never existed. The hum grows louder. My breath comes faster. I can feel the alley tightening around me. The whisper starts again, but this time it shaped something like my name. Or what sounds horribly close to it. My legs move without permission, one step back, another, my heels slipping on the damp ground as I feel the air shift toward me, like a tide pulling everything inward. The hum breaks into a low rumble. The light flickers once more, then dies. And in the moment the darkness closes, something moves in front of me. Close enough that I feel its presence bend the space between us. Close enough that when I inhale again, I'm not breathing alone. I keep replaying the moment she stepped into my office, though at the time I didn't understand why her presence shifted the air the way it did, or why the silence that followed her in felt heavier than the city noise outside. It was late afternoon, the kind of hour when the light turns pale and loses its warmth, slipping across the floor like it's afraid to be noticed. She stood there without moving, her coat still wet from the drizzle, her hands clasped too tightly for someone trying to appear composed. I remember thinking she looked like a person who'd been holding her breath for far too long. Her voice didn't match her posture. Calm, measured, polished in a way people learn only after years of trying not to break in public. She told me her name, slowly, as if gauging whether it meant anything to me, and then she told me she needed help. Not protection, not advice, not justice. Help. The word alone carried enough weight to make me lean back in my chair. She didn't sit until I gestured to the chair across from me, and even then she perched on its edge like someone expecting the floor to vanish beneath her. She spoke in fragments, not because she was hiding something, but because she didn't know how to put it together without unraveling. A missing person, a silence too long to ignore, inconsistencies in the police report that she kept touching with her fingers as though tracing invisible cracks. She didn't accuse anyone explicitly, didn't make demands, didn't cry. But there was something in the way her eyes darted to the corners of the room, as if expecting someone to emerge from the shadows, or perhaps remembering someone who once had. And somewhere in that fragmented account, she mentioned the place, a detail spoken softly, almost involuntarily, as though the name itself might stir something she wasn't sure she wanted awake. I wrote it down without looking at her, because I didn't want her to see the way my hand tensed at the sound of it. I'd heard of the place before, the kind of stories that circulate with no witnesses and too much certainty, the kind people dismiss until they find themselves thinking about them at night, staring at cracks in the ceiling that look like maps. I asked her when she last heard from him, and she said the words so quickly it sounded rehearsed. Then she corrected herself, quieter, slower, like she suddenly doubted the timeline she'd lived through. It left an impression that time around her didn't move the same way it did for everyone else. I watched her as she described their last conversation. Nothing dramatic, nothing unusual, just small pauses where there shouldn't have been pauses, a sense that someone else was listening on the line, though she never said that outright. She kept glancing at the window behind me, even though the blinds were closed. Every time she did, I felt that faint, familiar pressure at the back of my neck, the kind that makes you turn your head even when you know nothing will be there. Her details didn't add up, but not in the usual way. Not like someone altering facts to protect themselves, and not like someone lying. More like someone trying to recount a memory that refused to stay still. I asked why she came to me instead of the police, and she pressed her lips together before answering. When she finally spoke, she said she didn't trust the people handling the case, that some of them dismissed her concerns too quickly and others listened too closely. She said she needed someone outside the pattern, whatever that meant. She said it with such certainty that it didn't feel like a compliment. And when she looked at me across the desk with that steady, exhausted gaze, I had the faintest sense she wasn't asking for my skills so much as placing something in my hands she didn't know how to hold anymore. There was something else too, something she didn't say but hovered in the pauses between her words, the unspoken implication that whatever happened to him didn't begin on the night he disappeared. It began earlier, somewhere she couldn't see but felt approaching, like a change in air pressure before a storm. When she finally left, she paused at the door, her hand resting on the frame, staring into the dim corridor as though expecting it to shift. Then she looked back at me, and the expression on her face wasn't hope or fear but something harder to define. Resignation, maybe, or relief mixed with dread. As if, by giving me the case, she had set something in motion that could no longer be stopped. After she was gone, I sat in the dimming light, listening to the quiet hum of the building settling for the night. The shadows along the wall stretched longer than they should have. The name of the place she'd spoken lingered in my mind, echoing with a weight I didn't want to acknowledge. Whatever this was, it was already moving, and I had stepped into its path before realizing there was no way back. I kept moving in circles without realizing it at first, chasing the same fragments through different streets, different voices, different memories that contradicted themselves like they were afraid of what lay beneath their own surface. Each lead that should have opened a door only revealed another wall, smooth and cold, as if the city itself were folding around me to keep something hidden. I retraced the client's timeline until it blurred, spoke to neighbors who remembered too much or too little, sifted through messages that dissolved into half-thoughts and deleted drafts. And the more I learned, the less any of it made sense. He was there and then he wasn't. People spoke about him like they were trying to convince themselves he had ever existed at all. Their words felt rehearsed, shallow, like echoes of something they were afraid to repeat accurately. I started feeling the weight of it late at night, when the desk lamp flickered and the silence pressed too close. My notes sprawled across the table in loops, arrows, desperate underlines, and still the pattern refused to emerge. I'd wake with my face against the paper, convinced for a moment that I'd missed something glaring, only to find the same void staring back at me. Days blurred. My thoughts tangled. I'd catch myself walking with no memory of where I was heading, as if my body moved according to someone else's map. And the place she'd mentioned, its name beat at the back of my mind like a pulse, quiet but impossible to ignore. Every time I thought of it, I felt that familiar shift in the air, the faint tremor under the skin that made the world tilt by a fraction. When I finally visited it, nothing happened. Nothing obvious. Just a field of silence, a few abandoned structures leaning under their own history, and a kind of wind that sounds like someone whispering your name from far away. I left with more questions than before, but something lingered. A sensation that I'd been watched, not by a person but by the place itself. And then the false leads began to unravel in ways that felt intentional. Phone numbers that had been active the day before suddenly belonged to no one. CCTV footage dissolved into static right before the moment I needed. Witnesses recanted details they'd sworn to me with trembling hands. It was like chasing smoke. Every time I grasped a thread, it slipped away, leaving only that metallic taste in the back of my throat. I grew irritable, restless. Every failure pressed deeper, narrowing the investigation to a suffocating corridor. I kept feeling like I'd overlooked something obvious, that there was a detail sitting in plain sight patiently waiting for me to stop being blind. The breakthrough didn't come dramatically. It was small, almost laughably small. A name mentioned offhand by someone who barely remembered the man I was looking for. A name that matched a signature in a file the client had given me on the first day. Only the handwriting wasn't the same. At first I chalked it up to coincidence. But the more I compared, the deeper that unease dug into me. One signature was calm, elegant, the strokes confident. The other trembled, not from age or illness, but from fear. Fear leaves pressure on the paper. It changes the angle of the pen, the rhythm of the letters. And there was something else. A flourish at the end of the name. A hook-like curve that didn't match any other example of his handwriting. It didn't seem significant until I noticed the same curve etched faintly on the corner of the page, as if pressed there by something sharp. A pattern. Repeating. Subtle. Like a mark made unconsciously by a hand that wasn't entirely steady. I followed it. Slowly. Methodically. I traced the documents, the notes, the scattered fragments people had dismissed as unimportant. Everywhere it appeared, tiny, almost invisible, like the residue of a habit formed in fear, or in compulsion. And suddenly the walls around the investigation shifted. Only a little, but enough to show a crack. I realized the disappearance didn't start on the night she believed it did. It began weeks earlier. Maybe months. Something had been tightening around him. Something he tried to conceal but couldn't escape. Something that left its mark in the way he wrote, the way he hesitated, The way people around him spoke with one eye on the shadows. The pattern sharpened, aligning with quiet dread. He wasn't running from someone. He was running from himself, or from something that had started to take shape inside his life without him noticing. A presence. An influence. Not supernatural. Not entirely. More like an obsession that grew teeth. A connection he couldn't sever. And the last person who saw him, someone who had lied to me at first, finally cracked. Not with the truth I expected, but with a confession heavy with the kind of terror people bury deep. He said the man had changed. Not suddenly. Gradually. Like waking up each day with a piece missing. Like hearing sounds in empty rooms. Like following a voice he claimed was his own but didn't sound right anymore. He said the man had been afraid of places without knowing why. He said he'd been writing symbols he didn't remember writing. That hook-like flourish appearing over and over as if drawn by instinct. The same mark pressed into the page the client gave me. The same mark that appeared near the place she feared to mention. That was when I understood the heart of the mystery. Not the disappearance itself, but the slow unraveling that led to it. Something had been pulling him toward that place, not by force but by recognition. As if whatever he'd found there had begun to echo inside him. And by the time anyone noticed, he was already half gone. The clarity hit me like a cold hand on the back of the neck. He hadn't vanished. He'd returned to where it started. And if I wanted to find him, I had to follow the same path he'd taken, into the silence, into the shadows, into the place that was no longer waiting but watching die in the end. It didn't come down to a chase or a confrontation or any of the theatrics people like to imagine when they talk about disappearances. It ended quietly, almost inaudibly, like a breath leaving a room. I found him near the edge of that forsaken place, though not in the way I expected. Not lost, not broken, not trapped by anyone's hands but his own. He looked strangely peaceful, sitting in the tall grass with his back against a weathered stone, as if he'd been waiting for someone to arrive and confirm a truth he already knew. The fear that had been etched into his handwriting wasn't on his face anymore. Instead, there was something like resignation, or acceptance, or maybe the calm that comes after struggling against a current too long. He spoke little. He didn't try to justify anything, didn't unravel some tangled conspiracy, didn't reveal any villain skulking in the shadows. He only said he'd felt pulled back, the same way a tide drags a piece of driftwood toward shore. Not possessed, not controlled, but guided by something he couldn't name without sounding unhinged. And maybe he was unhinged. Grief, exhaustion, isolation, all of it can bend a mind back onto itself, but there was a clarity in his eyes that made it hard to dismiss entirely. He walked back with me without resistance.
No theatrics. No collapse.
Just a man who had crossed some unseen threshold and returned carrying the weight of what he'd found there. The police closed the case quickly once he resurfaced. No crime, no abduction, no culprit to drag into the light. Just a man who wandered off during a period of acute psychological stress, as they worded it, and a series of coincidences that looked more sinister on paper than they did in daylight. His friends accepted the explanation because they needed something to settle their nerves. His family accepted it because anything else felt too unwieldy to live with. Only the client, his partner, watched him with a quiet, enduring fear, as if she sensed there was a chapter he hadn't told anyone, something still clinging to him like the last echo of a distant voice. She thanked me when it was over. Not warmly, not with relief, but with the tight, grateful restraint of someone acknowledging the inevitability of things. She said she hoped he was back to himself, though the way she looked away afterward suggested she wasn't sure who that self was anymore. As for him, he moved through the following days like someone reacquainting himself with a world he had once known intimately but now found slightly altered, angles shifted, colors dimmer or sharper depending on the light. I checked on him twice. Both times he spoke politely, steadily, but with pauses that hinted at thoughts he didn't want to share. The mark, the small, hooked flourish, was no longer in his handwriting. He made sure I noticed that. Whether he'd been imitating something or whether something had been echoing through him. I left that question untouched. Some truths lose their meaning once spoken aloud. As for me, I return to my office with that lingering heaviness that comes from brushing against something you can't categorize, something that doesn't fit neatly into reports or testimony. I sorted my notes, filed the documents, and tried to step back into the rhythm of ordinary cases, but the silence from that place still clung to me in odd moments, like dust caught in the folds of a coat. I kept thinking about how the world has seams, thin, almost imperceptible, and how sometimes people slip too close to them. Most return. Some don't. And some come back altered in ways no diagnosis can measure. I reminded myself that the simplest explanation is usually the truest. Stress, delusion, unresolved trauma. And yet, late at night, when the city quiets and the shadows stretch just a little too far, I can still recall the way the air changed when I first stepped into that field, the hush that didn't feel like the absence of sound but the presence of something listening. I tell myself it was imagination, primed by fear and fatigue. I almost believe it. But every so often, when I sift through the case in my mind, there's a moment, a flash, a shiver, where I sense I'm missing a piece, something he understood but couldn't articulate, something the client felt in her bones the moment she walked into my office. Maybe some places hold on to the people who cross them. Maybe some people leave traces in the air even after they've walked away. Or maybe the world is simply larger and stranger than we like to admit, and every now and then the veil thins enough for us to notice. I won't claim to know which version is true. All I know is this: he came back, but not unchanged. She got her answers, but not her peace. And I closed the case, but something of it stayed with me, like a distant hum on the edge of hearing, a reminder that not every mystery ends when the paperwork does. Some linger, some watch, and some follow you home in ways you only recognize much later, when you're alone with your thoughts and the night feels a shade colder than it should.